I was in a meeting once, a room full of smart, successful people, and someone said something that stung. Not a big insult, just a quick comment that hit a tender place. My face got hot, my chest tightened, and my first instinct was hide it, smile, nod, act like nothing happened. That's what shame does. It tells us if they really saw this part of you, they'd walk away. And here's the thing, we've all felt it. But most of us would rather run a marathon in heels than sit in a conversation about shame. We avoid it like the plague because we've confused it with weakness. And I want to start by telling you this. Talking about shame isn't weakness. It's strategy. It's healing. It's courage in motion. Shame thrives in secrecy. The more we don't talk about it, the more control it has. The only way to take its power away is to name it, speak it, and hold it up to the light. But we can't do that if every time we try, we feel like we're betraying our own strength. Here's how we change that. Shame is the intensely painful feeling that we are unworthy of love and belonging. It's different from guilt. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. And that difference matters because guilt can be a catalyst for change, but shame corrodes the part of us that believes we can change. I remember talking with someone, let's call her Dana, who told me about a time she missed a deadline at work. She owned up to it, apologized, and stayed late to fix it. But what stuck with her wasn't the mistake. It was the voice in her head that said, you're unreliable. You're not cut out for this. That's shame. It doesn't just critique the action, it rewrites your identity. And what's tricky about shame is that it's quiet. It doesn't yell, it whispers. It sounds like, why are you even trying? You'll mess it up anyway. Or if they really knew you, they wouldn't want anything to do with you. And because those messages are internal, we often think we're the only ones hearing them. We confuse being alone with shame for being the only person who feels shame, which only deepens it. In all my research, one thing was painfully consistent. Every single person experiences shame. Every single one. But the people who were living wholehearted, resilient, connected lives, they didn't avoid shame. They acknowledged it. They spoke about it. They were aware of how it operated. The people most shaped by shame weren't weak. They were strong, but their strength was going toward hiding, protecting, performing, not healing. When we misunderstand shame, when we think it's just feeling embarrassed or regretful, we miss how deeply it shapes our behavior, our relationships, and our self-worth. Let me say this clearly. Shame is not a tool for growth. It's a weapon of disconnection. And it often gets passed down like an inheritance, quietly, subtly, sometimes even with good intentions. Parents, teachers, leaders, we've all seen moments where someone thinks, if I just make them feel bad enough, they'll change. But that's not how it works. Shame doesn't lead to lasting change. It leads to hiding, people-pleasing, aggression, addiction, perfectionism. It drives the need to prove or numb or disappear. We have to start by being honest with ourselves. What does shame feel like in my body? What does it sound like in my mind? What does it push me to do or avoid? When we recognize it, we can stop letting it sneak into our decisions. We can notice when it's trying to drive the car and say, hey, I see you, but you don't get the wheel today. Because here's the truth. When we understand what shame is and what it isn't, we give ourselves the chance to talk about it without letting it define us. We stop confusing it with humility. We stop thinking it's the price we have to pay to be worthy. And we start building a life that's based on belonging, not on performance. And that's where the healing begins. The moment we say this is shame, we take a step toward disarming it. Shame thrives in ambiguity and silence. When we give it a name, we put boundaries around it. There's something almost magical about naming what we're feeling. It's like shining a flashlight into a dark room. You suddenly see the shape of what was lurking in the shadows. For shame, which is so often silent and invisible, this act of naming is revolutionary. It stops the runaway stories our brains tell us when we're alone with those heavy feelings. When I work with people and ask them to notice what they're feeling in moments of discomfort or pain, most can say sad, angry, or frustrated. But when I ask if they feel shame, they often freeze or deflect. Shame is a tough guest. It makes us want to push it away or pretend it isn't there. But pretending only gives shame more power. It grows in the quiet, in the secret corners of our minds. Saying, I think I'm feeling shame right now is an act of courage. It's a way of saying, I see you and I'm not going to let you control me anymore. The words themselves create space for compassion and curiosity. Instead of beating ourselves up for feeling ashamed, we can pause and ask, why am I feeling this? What story am I telling myself? Is it true? One of the most important things I've learned is that naming shame helps us differentiate it from other feelings. Shame feels like a heavy weight on the chest, like we want to disappear or disappear from the eyes of others. But guilt feels more like a nudge, a signal that something we did hurt someone else and needs fixing. Naming the difference matters because guilt can be healthy, but shame often leaves us stuck. There's research that shows when people label their emotions, especially difficult ones, their brain activity shifts. The parts of the brain that light up with fear and overwhelm quiet down, and areas connected to language and regulation activate. In other words, naming our feelings actually helps regulate them. That's neuroscience telling us that naming isn't just a feel-good exercise, it's a tool for survival. But here's the catch. It's not enough to say it once or only in our heads. The real power comes when we say it out loud. To ourselves, to someone safe, or even just to the air. Speaking shame out loud breaks its spell. It reminds us that shame is a feeling, not a fact. And feelings, even intense ones, pass. I encourage people to practice saying it in small moments of discomfort, even when it feels awkward. I'm noticing shame right now. That's the beginning of self-compassion. Because shame and self-compassion cannot coexist. Where one grows, the other withers. This is why language is such a powerful tool in our healing journey. When we give shame a name, we also give ourselves permission to be imperfect, messy, human. We stop trying to armor up or hide behind a mask of perfection. Instead, we start inviting connection by showing up exactly as we are. So next time you feel that tightness in your chest or the voice that says you're not enough, try naming it. Say, this is shame. Watch how it changes the energy. Watch how it gives you a little more space to breathe, to choose, and to be brave. Because naming shame is the first step to taking its power away. You don't need a big stage or a therapy office to start talking about shame. What you need is someone who's earned the right to hear your story. Not someone who will try to fix you, someone who can sit in the dark with you and say, you're not alone. One of the hardest lessons I've learned over the years is that vulnerability isn't about oversharing with anyone who will listen. It's about being seen by those who have proven themselves worthy of that trust. We all want to be heard and understood, but shame makes us hyper aware of how others might judge us. So much so that we end up either hiding or telling our story in ways that keep us safe, but don't heal us. Safe. People don't just listen. They hold space without judgment. They don't jump in with advice or try to fix the problem. They simply say, I see you, I hear you, you're not alone. That's the antidote to shame right there. Empathy. Empathy sounds like me too, and I get it, not you should or here's what you need to do. When we pick the wrong people, those who react with criticism, blame, or indifference, we learn quickly that shame is contagious. It feeds on rejection and isolation. And because shame feels so raw and vulnerable, those experiences can push us deeper into hiding. It's like handing shame the microphone and letting it amplify its voice. Choosing safe people requires courage because it means risking rejection. It means trusting someone enough to be honest and messy, knowing they might disappoint you. But here's the paradox. When we find even one person who responds with empathy, who holds our story with care, it can shift everything. It rewires our nervous system and begins to heal the wounds shame has carved. Think about the last time you shared something deeply personal and felt met with compassion rather than judgment. Remember how that made you feel lighter, less alone, maybe even hopeful? That's the power of safe people. Safe people don't have to be therapists or coaches. They can be friends, family members, colleagues, anyone who has demonstrated consistent respect, kindness, and understanding. The question isn't who's perfect or has all the answers, but who makes it safe for you to be imperfect and human. This also means learning to say no to conversations or relationships that aren't safe. Protecting your vulnerability is an act of self-respect. It's okay to set boundaries and choose not to share your story with people who haven't earned the right to hear it. Vulnerability isn't a free-for-all, it's selective and intentional. When you surround yourself with safe people, shame loses its power because it no longer thrives in silence or isolation. Instead, it encounters empathy, and empathy is the antidote to shame. So as you begin to talk about shame, remember, you don't have to do it alone. Find your people, those safe, imperfect, empathetic souls who will walk beside you. That's where healing begins. Being open doesn't mean being exposed. Vulnerability isn't oversharing, it's intentional sharing. You don't owe everyone your story. What you owe yourself is the chance to tell it in places where it will be held with care. I have learned this lesson more times than I can count. There was a time when I believed that being vulnerable meant telling every detail, every fear, every wound to anyone who would listen. I thought that transparency was the fastest path to connection. But what I discovered, sometimes painfully, is that not every listener is ready or able to hold your truth. And when you share your story in a place that isn't safe, vulnerability can feel like exposure, and exposure can lead to shame. So setting boundaries around our vulnerability is an act of radical self-care. It means knowing who you are willing to be open with, what parts of your story you're ready to share, and when it's okay to hold back. It's about respecting your own emotional safety. Vulnerability without boundaries is like giving away your heart without asking if the other person is ready to hold it gently. And that can leave us feeling more alone than ever, because when our trust is met with judgment or dismissal, shame rushes in like a flood. Choosing to be vulnerable with intention also helps us avoid the trap of oversharing, which can sometimes be a way to seek validation or try to control how others see us. But real vulnerability doesn't seek to manipulate or fix. It simply shows up with honesty and openness without needing a specific outcome. In my research, I've seen how people who set healthy boundaries around vulnerability build resilience. They know when to lean in and when to step back. They protect their hearts but don't armor them so tightly that connection becomes impossible. That balance is the sweet spot where healing happens. It's also important to recognize that boundaries around vulnerability can change over time. Someone who felt unsafe hearing your story 6 months ago might be ready now, or vice versa. Being attuned to how you feel after sharing, whether lighter or more drained, can be a powerful guide for when and with whom to be vulnerable. There's no shame in saying, I'm not ready to talk about this yet. That's honoring your own pace and process. Vulnerability isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. And when you do decide to share, it's okay to be clear about what you need in return. Sometimes that's just a listening ear. Sometimes it's empathy or reassurance. Sometimes it's silence and presence. Being able to ask for what you need is part of protecting your emotional well-being. Remember, vulnerability is about showing up and being seen, but it's also about showing up for yourself. That means creating a container around your story where it can be received with kindness, not judgment. That container is made of boundaries. So as you navigate talking about shame, keep this in mind. Your vulnerability is a precious gift. Give it wisely, protect it fiercely, and watch how that intentional sharing opens the door to true connection and healing. Because when vulnerability is held with care, it transforms from a source of fear into a source of strength. Shame changes how we talk to ourselves, and if we're not careful, that inner voice starts sounding like truth. The key is to interrupt that voice with something more compassionate, more grounded. I want to be really clear here. That voice inside your head, the one that says, I'm not good enough, or I don't deserve this, or I'm a failure, is not your truth. It's shame talking. And shame is a liar. It's relentless, it's ruthless, and it loves to rewrite your story in the most damaging ways possible. But just because it feels real doesn't mean it's real. One of the hardest parts of dealing with shame is that it often sounds like our own voice. It masquerades as self-criticism or humility or accountability. And because it's so familiar, it's easy to accept its messages without question. But what happens when we listen to that voice day after day, year after year? It wears us down. It erodes our confidence, our joy, our ability to show up authentically in the world. Rewiring that inner dialogue starts with awareness. You have to start noticing when shame is speaking, what triggers it, what situations, people, or memories activate that voice. And then, instead of letting it run wild, you have to learn to intervene. You become the boss of your brain, not the other way around. For example, when you hear yourself thinking, I'm a failure, pause and ask, is that really true? Or is this shame talking? Then try replacing that thought with something kinder, something that acknowledges your humanity. I made a mistake, but I'm learning. Or I'm doing the best I can, and that's enough. This isn't about sugarcoating or ignoring your mistakes. It's about holding space for yourself as a whole person, flaws, struggles, and all, without letting shame define your worth. It's a practice of self-compassion, and like any practice, it takes time and patience. There's all science behind this too. Studies show that people who practice self-compassion experience less anxiety, depression, and stress. They're more resilient, more motivated, and have healthier relationships. When we speak to ourselves with kindness, our brain actually calms down. The threat response that shame triggers gets dialed back, making space for growth and healing. I also want to mention that this rewiring doesn't mean you'll never feel shame again. Shame is part of being human. The goal isn't to eliminate it, but to develop a healthier relationship with it. When shame comes knocking, you can greet it without letting it move in and take over. Part of that is recognizing when shame tries to disguise itself as perfectionism or people-pleasing. You might catch yourself thinking, if I just work harder or please everyone, I won't feel this shame. But that's a trap. It's shame pushing you to prove your worthiness through external means instead of accepting it internally. Rewiring your inner dialogue means giving yourself permission to be imperfect and vulnerable. It means reminding yourself daily that you are worthy of love and belonging just as you are, not because of what you do or how you perform, but simply because you're human. This is where true courage lives, right in the messy, beautiful middle of imperfection. When you start talking to yourself with compassion, you begin to dismantle shame's power, piece by piece. Because the stories we tell ourselves become the stories we live by. And when those stories are rooted in kindness, resilience, and truth, we create a life that's not defined by shame, but by wholeheartedness. So here we are, standing on the other side of something hard. We've unpacked shame, named it, set boundaries around it, and started to challenge the voice it uses to try and keep us small. And if there's one thing I want you to walk away with, it's this: you are not broken. Shame wants to convince you that your struggles are proof of your unworthiness. But the truth is, your willingness to face it, to speak it, and to stay kind to yourself in the middle of it, that's not weakness, that's courage. Talking about shame doesn't make you fragile, it makes you free. And freedom doesn't come from perfection or pretending everything's fine. It comes from truth-telling, boundary setting, and choosing self-compassion over self-judgment. Every time you name your shame, every time you choose safe connection over silence, every time you meet yourself with kindness, you are rewriting the script. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to be willing to show up with honesty, with boundaries, and with a little grace. Keep doing that, and shame loses its grip. You are already worthy. You are already enough. And this work, this brave, messy, wholehearted work, will take you places shame never could. Good luck. You've got this.